it's part of a broader project, specifically with regard to education and universities in particular. I mean, this is like, Trump's executive order on quote unquote patriotic education. They want to have leverage over these universities to control the type of education that, the students who, Harvard and Yale and all these institutions are very powerful. Those are the people who end up in power.
That's right.
They want to use this cudgel in order to enforce compliance across, this is sort of the tip of the spear. And then it's the same thing with the war on CRT and DEI, and I have my own issues with those ideologies, et cetera. But there's a concerted effort to teach a sanitized version of history, and this is part of the cudgel that is being used to effectuate that broader outcome, because they do see these universities as an alternative power center. And so, this is something in a sort of ideological architecture that has been supported both by liberals like Joe Biden and most of the elected Democratic political leaders and much of the media, New York Times, et cetera. And so it's the easiest way for them to really push that project. But I don't think that it stands alone. It's part of a broader project.
Yeah, it definitely is. I guess so. The difference then between you and me is, I have no problem withholding funding from Harvard or from any of these other people for propping up DEI or teaching for critical race theory, because that concerns our country. I do have a big problem with weaponizing.
But the idea of intellectual freedom is like,
listen, they have a $50 billion.
You can disagree with DEI, but like if you want to teach.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome to. You have a $50 billion endowment that you can draw down every day. Me as the American taxpayer and others, we can vote to withhold our funding from said institutions, no? And I think that's a pretty fair rebuttal.
I think there's...
Yeah.
That's actually fair in that the universities, I mean, Harvard and certainly Yale and these other Ivy League institutions, they have the endowments where we talked about with Columbia.
Yeah.
Like they don't actually need the $400 million. No. They could fill in that gap. It wouldn't be a problem. These endowments have become so massive and they're like a business in and of themselves, but many universities do not fall into that category, right? And they're actually the ones that are most vulnerable, which is why it's so disheartening to see the Harvards and the Columbias and the Ivy League institutions, which are in a position to actually stand up for intellectual freedom, and their own integrity, and completely capitulating in the face of this assault.
I don't know. See, the thing is public education by default, if it's going to be funded by the public, then of course we get a say. The idea that you should have intellectual freedom at a, quote, public university is preposterous.
What?
Because public education is for the purpose of, quote, educating the public based on the taxpayer. Right.
Right.
So we should just
don't we want a public that's educated, like about the scourge of racism, slavery, and Jim Crow?
Educated to what end? The purpose of public education is to benefit the American taxpayer by having people who are skilled,
who are educated,
intellectually curious, or whatever, and to become a better citizen.
Yeah.
But there's also like an economic benefit to this. So
you don't think that public universities there should be like intellectual freedom at public universities?
Okay, I mean, if
Harvard is also not a public university.
But under that argument, yeah, I agree with you, and that's what I'm trying to say, though, is that at a state level, like if the state of Massachusetts, if they had a literal white power curriculum, do you think that that would be acceptable? I would say absolutely not. The state of Massachusetts, at the University of Massachusetts, if those taxpayers voted to say that that's not in line with what we want to teach our schools, be my guest. It's your university. You guys are the ones who fund it.
And so you think that teaching about, the scourge of slavery and let's say our, genocide against Native Americans is equivalent to a white power seminar?
Well, I think that if you're going to teach it in such a way, like the 1619 Project did, which was also funded and then used at some of these elite universities to say America is irrevocably racist, then what are we all doing here? I mean, there's no point, to this entire thing. So this is the problem, is you think one is justifiable and not. I'm making a point about academic freedom, which is genuinely value neutral. So if the taxpayer and the public broadly mostly agrees with me about critical race theory and DEI, then yes, they should be able to influence and say those universities should not be allowed to do this with our dollars.
That's actually not even true, though, that the taxpayer in the country agrees with you about DEI. But I think we can all recognize that there are some intellectual inquiries that are worthy of debate, to take it out of race, like some intellectual inquiries that are worthy of debate and some which are only add confusion to the debate. So, for example, it wouldn't be like, worthy of academic freedom to have some flat earther there trying to make their case, et cetera. But to have people who, see race as a central component of our nation's history and, teach courses on that, teach courses on, gender studies has been a big target. I would say that understanding the dynamics of our genders and our differences has perhaps never been more important. There's a lot that we could learn from there. I think that is completely within the bounds.
Fine, then go to Harvard or to a private university.
Taught at a school, and certainly represents the sort of academic freedom that the right, really obsessed over during the Biden administration and previously. So to enforce this sort of conformity and you have to learn quote unquote patriotic history that doesn't ever cast the America in a negative light. I mean, that's what they're going for here. And they're using anti-Semitism as a cudgel in order to help bring these universities to heel, so that they're only teaching the versions of American history that are approved by this particular government.
If you want to put your kid into some Howard Zinn university, that's your right. You can go to some private university. But if public-funded universities by the taxpayer obviously have a right, not only in the say on the curriculum, but into be paying for and to propping up said departments, which are genuinely 100% funded by them and not some major endowment. I genuinely couldn't disagree more. I mean,
I don't really understand then your opposition to what they're doing with anti-Semitism
because we're doing it on behalf of foreign countries.
What they would say is that this is our foreign policy. This is the argument Marco Rubio and others make. This is our national security. This is our foreign policy. We want our tax dollars to go to further our national interest as American citizens. And part of our interest is in combating anti-Semitism and bolstering our ally Israel in the Middle East. So what's your issue with what they're doing?
No, that's my point, is that I completely disagree with that. But I'm saying, I mean, do you really believe in a principle where the taxpayer has no say on the academic input or the academic environment that they're going to fund? That's ridiculous.
I believe that we should have academic freedom and intellectual exploration.
Okay, and so you would be okay with a white power classroom at the University of Virginia?
Yeah, exactly. No, I already explained that there are certain things that do not add to the academic or intellectual atmosphere.
Who's setting the standard? The democracy.
Society does.
Yes, that's right, exactly.
And society
and we can have elections, and we can have inputs.
Saagar, society thinks it's important. They don't agree with you on DEI. By the way, they don't even agree with me on DEI. Society is in favor of knowing the facts about our history, even the ugly facts about our history. And I think it's incredibly important that we be able to learn. And you're a history guy.
Yes, that's right.
You know more about this stuff than I do, Saagar.
But that's my point.
And it was important for your own intellectual development to know the truth about those past horrors, whether it's Jim Crow or whether it's slavery or whether it was what was done to Native American people on these lands. That's not to say you have to live with that shame and guilt where this is, what the right always says. But yeah, you want to learn from the past. You want to learn from the mistakes so we don't repeat them again in the future. And that's what's under assault here with this onslaught against universities. They want to bring them to heel so that only the quote unquote, the sanitized quote unquote patriotic version of history that is not honest about the warts and the truth of, things that our country has been involved in.
I would need to see curriculum for which you're describing that as, because I think
Go look at what PragerU is putting out. Go look at the curriculum they put into Florida.
That's not a real university. That's
no, but Saagar, they used that for curriculums in places like Florida as part of this patriotic education push. This is the broader project.
Okay,
and so if you don't see the way that this anti-Semitism thing is being used as a cudgel to enforce a broader bringing to heel of these universities, that is just one plank of the plan here. That is the tip of the spear. But the broader plan is to completely bring these universities to heel and make them comply with whatever sanitized history that this particular administration finds to be useful.
My point is that your quote, quote, sanitized history, the other, quote, true history is one where we just sit there and we're supposed to be like, oh, and these are all the most horrible things about America. My education in Texas was terrible. And it wasn't because it was woke. It was genuinely just not actual. It had 1 inch depth of which 99% of the US population will ever actually read below. The vast majority majority of what I've learned has been reading on myself. And what I have learned is what? Is that there is deep complexity to the issue, and that with Jim Crow and with the slavery and the South and the debates at the U.S. Constitutional Convention during the Civil War and more were not often all pure and heroic in the way that we like to learn, or all that evil, is that there was a deep amount of gray area in that time, and that actually the story of how we were able to emerge today to a much more equal society, not yet of where we are, is remarkable and is one in which we should absolutely study, and I think we should celebrate. Now, I think critical race theory, what it does is invert that on its head and to say, no, actually where we are today is an immense failure and we didn't get there. And this so-called true history or whatever is just like leftist claptrap, to be honest. Like, it's not one which genuinely grapples with any of the good of the U.S. has done, because like I referenced with Howard Zinn and more, it views it as this evil empire, morally corrupt at its founding, as the 1619 Project does. And what that instills in people and or the citizen is this idea that we can never get better instead of looking at both equally. This is my issue with critical race theory.
I'm familiar with your opinion.
Yeah.
However, the question is, do you think that learning about those things should be effectively banned by the state?
Effectively banned. Well,
I mean, but that's the goal.
Like, come on.
That is the goal, is to enforce conformity on these universities and to push a sanitized narrative. So that, I just think that, listen, you can agree or disagree with how central race is and the way that this affected our nation's development. I mean, I would say that it's been a pretty important part of many of the most critical battles in terms of, how we've gotten to where we are today, and important to learn about and see the legacy of, et cetera. But like, I believe you've previously spoken on behalf of academic freedom. And to think that that's out of bounds, or that the state should use its power to bully universities out of teaching that sort of, sort of history is, I think, pretty wild.
I want to be clear here. I'm talking specifically about public education. I think we can all agree curriculum is propaganda in some form, yes or no? Now, in that propaganda, we all democratically get to decide in that public education for what should be and should be not taught in our classrooms. This is ultimately a parental decision. In fact, I think that what you're laying out is a ridiculous idea, where the taxpayer is supposed to give you unlimited or whatever amount of funds, and you're able to just be able to do whatever you want and preach that to children and or create curriculum for students. We cannot live in a society
So first of all, we're talking
and have never lived in a society
specifically
like
about universities.
Okay, sure.
Number one.
Yes. But these are publicly funded. Every time I look at my property tax bill, I'm pretty sure I know where a lot of it's going.
And we're predominantly talking about, this just gets to I think a fundamental difference about what the university system is even for. Because in my opinion, the university system is not, including the public university system, is all about academic and intellectual exploration. That's how even thinking through things that might be out of bounds, right, politically, that are outside of certainly the consensus of the public. Like, that's how you push research and intellectual activity forward. And so, yes, I think that's important to support at both the public university level, and, certainly private universities should be able to do what they want. And they're not doing a good job of standing up for themselves in the face of this onslaught. But yes, of course, I think having academic curiosity and risk-taking within the university system, I see that as a core value of the university system. I don't see it as a place where we're just supposed to stamp out these conformist ideas and, based on what the current regime approves, that you're allowed to learn about. That is completely foreign to my notion of what the university system is supposed to be all about.
You're also inverting an issue here, which is, what did I say? That I didn't actually learn all that much in school. I've mostly learned about it myself. So if you're curious, all the information you need is out there. And I've got about 1% of what I need, and I'll be looking for the rest of the 5% of what I'm able to consume over the course of my life. But last thing here is, you made a good point about what is education. The course of public education, why did we create it? Was to create a more skilled populace. And my problem, and for economic benefit. That's the truth. It's all namby-pamby nice to say, oh, intellectual curiosity, etc. The problem that we have today is that way too many people go to college to pursue degrees which are not economically viable and which saddle them up with a lot of debt. The solution to that is not to offer, quote, free college so that everybody can go get little box checks. It's to make sure that people pursue higher educational, vocational training, or wherever, or perhaps a four-year college degree for the purpose of being able to pursue the American dream, which you individually get to define for yourself. So that's my last thing, is just like this idea that you're going to be conformist because you go to college. I went to a college with a bunch of woke people. In fact, being around them made me a lot more intellectually curious about what I wasn't learning in school, and you could pursue it for yourself. But that's an inversion of this idea that everything you're ever going to learn about the world is going to be at a four-year college degree. No, we're supposed to lay a foundation for which you yourself can go from there and spring. Some of that is risk-taking, etc. But, and like I said, the purpose of public education and why we fund it itself is not to have people sitting around reading Proust or whatever. It's so that you can go out and you can get a job, which is going to benefit yourself and ultimately benefit the entire country.
I think that treating human beings and their education as solely being about becoming effective cogs in the American capitalist machine, yeah, I disagree with that end goal of that being the only goal of our
even
education,
in the Soviet Union,
and
why did people go to school?
And especially our university system.
Yeah, but I'm saying even in a communist system, why did they send people to public university? It wasn't, again, to be sitting around and reading and debating Marxist-Leninism.
I just think that this is so funny.
It was to send them to a factory.
I just think this is so funny to come from you because you're so intellectually curious.
Absolutely.
And you're so well read. And not everything that you consume is about like, how can I generate more profit? How can I like make more money?
I do it for my own edification.
You value, and it has made you part of who you are, that you have that intellectual curiosity and that you have that intellectual development. And I'm not saying that all of that comes within a like traditional school system. Of course it doesn't. But I think an important part, especially for young adults, within that system, when you have a fantastic professor who opens your eyes up to something, who helps you to understand something you didn't understand before, to help you explore the world, to help you learn about history and see the lessons of the past and be able to apply them to the present and, you know, understand better the trajectory that you're on. So yeah, of course I think that that's an important part of the university system and that it's not all just about, like, I mean, why should anyone go to university at all if you're just like, training for your end goal as a human being of your career?
No, a lot of people actually shouldn't go, and I've said that before. I think the amount of people who go is way too high. It probably should be 20, 30% less, because I think last I checked it was like 45%. But I mean, that's what I'm saying is the flip is I'm not going to sit here and tell you or even believe in a system where the public education system is supposed to be the be-all, end-all of on it. As I said, I was much more inspired to read and to be individually more curious from what I didn't learn in school and asking questions about that. So it just comes down to the fact that I believe that the reason public education exists literally at all, and you can go and look for why we decided for this grand experiment in the first place, was genuinely, not nice to say it, but the truth is so we could all be more beneficial to each other. Part of that is intellectual exercise and more, but a lot of what public education has become an economic saddle on the American taxpayer and on the individual who is participating in the system, who is hobbling their life forever. I believe in individual pursuit of whatever it is that you want to do. I like to read for my own edification. I'm very lucky I've been able to pursue a career in something like that. But even if I didn't do this, I would still be doing it whenever I was doing something else. That's what I like to do. But that's my point, is it wasn't necessarily something inspired by the great public university, or private university, I guess, where I went for something. It basically comes back to this idea of why is the public participating in this in the future? I just believe, of course, the public has a right and has a responsibility, to be honest, of being involved in this, and not some blank tabula rasa slate where these professors are allowed to take our dollars and then do whatever they want. That has never existed for literally all of human history or conception of public education. It has always been any curricula in which the state is paying for is itself a debate and is propaganda in some form. It's about a war of what is supposed to be in that propaganda to shape a better citizenry, and then that's the debate that you and I are having now.
I think universities should be about intellectual exploration, and I don't think that they will benefit from having a heavy hand of the state coming in to enforce what is acceptable thought And I think we see that very clearly with the efforts that are being taken here with regard to quote unquote anti-Semitism.
All right,
so
fun
we
debate.
can leave it there.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.